Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Jacob Close.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The greatest generation is term coined to describe a generation of Americans who contributed and sacrificed so much in World War II. As a function of time, the veterans of this generation are rapidly diminishing in number. Because of this decline, projects were initiated to record and preserve the experiences of the World War II veterans. My contribution to this is a manuscript I wrote of my World War II experiences, which was done especially for the generations of my own family. For their use, I compiled my experiences into a book which I titled Memoirs of a Ground Pounder. Now, World War II was replete with personal experiences for me. Therefore, the book consists of 260 pages. Don't worry though, I'll only share a few of my experiences with you here today. Back in 1941, a draft was in effect which required 1 year of military service. I joined with two of my friends as volunteers to enlist in the Army. My attitude was that this was a good time to take care of my obligation. I had a bad back injury due to industrial accident, and I wasn't sure that I'd be able to pass the Army's physical examination. Nonetheless, we three went to the recruiting station and we took the physical. The physical was a revelation to me. The doctors did not bother to determine the status of the previously torn ligaments in my back. Apparently, my ability to walk in was enough for acceptance. Only 5 of us took the examination at the same time that I took mine. Of the 5, I with an injured back was the only one to pass. I was inducted into the United States Army on the 25th of January, 1941. Now, this discrepancy in passing has a story back of it, which relates to having a 4F classification so that you could get along with your employer in a much better and more permanent manner. Now, this was the start of a tradition of military service for my family, which the mayor has indicated. My son Kenneth entered the Army through the University of Toledo's ROTC program and retired 20 years later as a lieutenant colonel. My granddaughter Carol is a 2001 graduate of Southview High School and currently a senior airman at the Air Force Base of Wright-Patterson. She was recently designated as the Honor Guard Airman of the Year at Wright-Pat. And just a few days from now, Carol will be deployed for service in Iraq. Now, after her introduction, a group of us were sent to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, where the Ohio 37th Infantry Division had been activated in October of 1940. I was assigned to Company I of the 148th Infantry Regiment, and I spent the steamy hot months of Shelby, which consisted of basic training and 2 large-scale maneuvers in Louisiana. During this time, I advanced through the ranks from private to sergeant. On Sunday, December the 7th, 1941, most of the troops were off the post for the weekend. Those of us in Camp Shelby were hanging around in the company area, enjoying a day free from drill and mandatory routine. When it was announced on the radio that Pearl Harbor had been attacked, most of us had very little to say. We heard over and over again, "It's war now, it's war now." Our thoughts were concerning what happens next. We no longer could expect a limited period of service, and we had to consider the effect the war would have on our families, our plans, and our lives. In 1942, the 37th Division entered the Pacific Theater. We were holding defensive positions on the island of Vita Levu, Fiji, when our division commander, General Beetler, obtained authority to conduct an officer's training course. At this authority, he opened the officer candidate school, which I attended. Upon graduation, I was commissioned a second lieutenant and was assigned to the division's 129th Infantry Regiment. From there, our regiment went to New Hebrides, which was a large naval base, and where we stayed for 7 months. Then we moved on to Guadalcanal. We used Guadalcanal as a staging area to prepare to make a covered beachhead landing on Bougainville. And that took place in November of 1943. Landing on Bougainville placed the regiment in an active combat situation. With 3.5 years in the Pacific Theater, I could talk for a long time about my experiences, such as like when I was standing on the open deck of a troop transport and was making eye contact with a Japanese pilot who flew by and barely missed our ship. Or I could talk about landing on the Philippine beaches under the flames and the deafening roar of the battleship's 16-inch guns. Or I could tell you what it's like fighting Japanese soldiers but you can't see at night. Or what it's like leading Japanese patrols miles and miles in front of our lines. I could even talk about how I is being wounded by a Japanese sniper. However, what I really want to share with you today is one of the most important and difficult duties I had to perform during the war. We landed on the Philippine island of Luzon on the 9th of January, 1945. Our initial objective was to race to recapture the city of Manila, which was being devastated by the Japanese. I was a captain by then and was the commander of Headquarters Company of the 1st Battalion. It was during the fight for Manila that my company suffered its first fatal casualty. As a commander, it was my duty to write a letter to the next of kin of each member of my company who was killed in action. Without any training or experience in this type of correspondence, I wanted to ensure that my letters were sufficiently detailed, completely truthful, conveyed sincerity, and would hopefully be of some comfort to the family. My first letter was to a very young wife of a sergeant who was in charge of the 37mm gun section. The sergeant was killed by enemy mortar fire while attempting to cross the Pasig River in Manila. After meticulous work and preparation, the letter was submitted to the regimental commander for approval and forwarding. Several months later, I received a reply from the young widow, which included questions requesting additional information. I answered her questions as best I could, but the one question I could not answer was, why did it have to be my Elton? When I lost a soldier, I always reviewed the situation. Was the soldier simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? In Elton's case, this wasn't true. The sergeant was in the right place at the right time, doing his job in a professional manner, as he had been trained to do it. I replied to the wife's question with a phrase to let her know that I did not have an answer for her. Only God knows why the brave have gone before us. Now, Memorial Day is a good time to wonder what the world would be like if we no longer had wars and nobody needed an army. But this would seem to be idle speculation, as history is against us in this matter. In all of the recorded history of the world, there has been only 127 years during which there were no wars. I cannot recall the source of this information, but I'm not inclined to question its authenticity. In my lifetime, I don't know of a single year when the entire world was at peace. So in the future, we can plan on having wars and having the need for a dedicated military force. You can assume that some of the future military service members will come from America's heartland, Sylvania, Ohio. And as it always has been and will continue to be within the United States Armed Forces, all will give some, and some will give all. God bless our armed forces. May God bless America.